I think this mic won't pick up the sound of Blade licking his balls, but if it does, enjoy.
All right, I'm gonna leave that one in.
Are we starting right now? Are we going?
All right, so joining me right now is my co-host, Jeff Otto. Jeff, I've known you for 20, oh my gosh, has it been 20 years? I think it's been 20 years or close to it. A long time, man.
20 years this past May.
Unbelievable.
May 2003.
You smoked me out of my apartment. That's a story for another time.
Yes. Not kind of smoke they might be thinking of, though.
No, different barbecue smoke in this
which is
case,
now legal in California anyway, so it's all good.
Yeah, totally. All right, man. So, why don't you give your background for a few minutes? Like, tell people who you are. You worked in corporate America for a while. And now you've been out of corporate America for a while, and I don't know, maybe just tell people a little bit about yourself.
I went to film school many years ago, film and photo degree, came out and landed a kind of random job as an assistant to a screenwriter named Tim Herlihy, who wrote the Adam Sandler movies. So that was kind of an unexpected job in a remote town of Ridgefield, Connecticut. I worked for 3 years, kind of going back and forth between LA and Connecticut on the Adam Sandler movies, premieres and entourages, and pretty interesting line of fire. I think 3 weeks into the job, sat at the Little Nicky premiere behind the Osborne family 2 weeks before the Osborne show launched, and next to John Lovitz and Kevin Nealon and Will Ferrell and all these crazy people. So I was thrust into this world and, pretty enamored. I met Quentin Tarantino that night and had a whole chat about Adam Sandler as the lead in Inglourious Bastards, which, as many people know, didn't happen. But I did that for a few years, and then decided I needed to do something besides get this guy's coffee and watch his kids and pick up his dry cleaning. So I moved to LA with a plan to continue as an assistant or work in production. That didn't really pan out. I had interviews with famed producer Linda Obst. I had lunch with Drew Barrymore. I did all these crazy things and ultimately ended up managing a Hollywood video because I needed to get paid. And
what is a Hollywood video? Nobody's going to know what that is.
Yes, it's a store where you actually had to pick up these little platters, these silver reflective platters that play movies one at a time. They don't stream. So I did that job, which was horrible, but I mostly sat in the back room and wrote articles and tried to submit them to publications until I got some interest from the video game and men's entertainment site IGN, and they hired me to freelance. And I was one night called and they asked me if I could be at the Santa Anita racetrack in 2 hours to interview Tobey Maguire and Jeff Bridges. And that's what I did. I went to the Santa Anita racetrack. I interviewed these guys. I asked Jeff Bridges if he really contributed the clothes to The Big Lebowski. And he pulled out the sunglasses from The Big Lebowski, put them on, and said, "What do you think, man?" Which is pretty cool. Nice. Had to call my dad about that. And so I did that for about 6 months as a freelancer. And then they offered me a full-time job on staff. And so I became sort of the head guy or one of the head guys for their movie section. So I did what they call press junkets, which if you don't know what those are, when a movie is about to release, they do these promotional events where you go to usually a fancy hotel like the Beverly Hilton or the Four Seasons, and you interview the cast, the directors, the writers usually, and you screen the movie. So I would review the movies and I would interview the cast, and I would either submit a printed article that I would write, or I sometimes did on-camera interviews. So I would get these tapes and take them to our editor, and they'd edit me into a clip of an interview with, Tom Cruise or Will Ferrell or Will Smith, all these big people. So I was thrust into this world, and it was pretty exciting for a while. I got flown all over the world to go to sets. I was on the set of the original Batman Begins. I was on Chronicles of Narnia. I was flown to Prague to do Doom with The Rock, where I got insane food poisoning. So that was fun. And so I did that for 2.5 years on staff with IGN before I got lured away by, and this is kind of where the corporate America part of things came in, because IGN was very much like a sort of frat house. We played video games, we goofed around, we had 3-hour lunch breaks.
You were traveling quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
And going to these press junkets, but you still had an office, right? You didn't work from home really at that time. I mean, work from home probably wasn't as much of a thing. Did you, was there an office that you went into?
I always worked from home as a journalist. I did have an office, I had a desk, but my days were so mixed up where there would be a press event in the middle of the day, or there would be a screening I had to go to. I mean, sometimes I would screen 2 or 3 movies in a day. So it depended on what my boss wanted. If I had nothing going on, he'd prefer me to come in, but they were very loose at IGN about it. It got less.
But it's not like you were never in an office. Like you.
Oh yeah, I was in an office.
Yeah. You were in an office, okay? And obviously other people over there. So you dealt with the sort of things that we'll get into, interpersonal relationships, politics, all that stuff that occurs in an office. Like you still experience that. It's not like you were 100% of the time or even 90% of the time traveling internationally to
right, exactly. And what was interesting about that IGN office was this was at the tail end or right after that .com bubble of the late 90s. So IGN had like a ridiculous valuation and had bought offices and fancy desk chairs. I actually have one of them. They gave me one of them. I have what's that fancy branded chair, the $1,500 chairs? I have one of those. Fantastic chair. It's been with me 20 years almost now. Anyway, so they had this office that was like 75% empty with like, demo level $10,000 speakers and big screen TVs and, fancy chairs and big conference rooms. And it was sort of eerie and funny. I mean, it just sat empty most of the time. And, so we had these, I could go into work at my desk, or I could pretty much go into like an executive's office who had been let go and sit in there because there was they had like overblown things quite a bit, but it was a fun place to work. It's a fun atmosphere. And it was corporate, but much less corporate than kind of what you're speaking of. I'd say it was a pretty loose atmosphere.
But I mean, there are a lot of environments like that, startups primarily.
Yeah.
But all right, so you were saying you get lured away from IGN to go work.
Yes, there was a new TV channel launching, which I think is sort of still around, but it's kind of a shell of what it was intended to be. But I was lured away by a friend who I'd met on the junket circuit named Philip Nakov, and he had an executive position at this startup called ReelzChannel, which initially was intended to be like an ESPN for the movie industry. That was the idea. The hope was that, in Hollywood, people would just have ReelzChannel sitting on in their office all day long, and it would talk about everything that's going on in Hollywood. It didn't work out that way, and I think these days it's showing like Cheers and Matlock reruns all day, and maybe there's a lot of infomercials about scooters, but they had some Steven Seagal made-for-TV movies. Anyway, it's sort of around, but I don't think anybody, 16 years later, people still don't know what I'm talking about, even if they get the channel on their cable or satellite. But that was a much more corporate environment. It was run by the Hubbard family, who were kind of big fish in Minneapolis. They ran a bunch of radio and TV channels. And I won't get into all the nuances of that, but long story short, they were the big fish in Minneapolis, and they thought that they were going to be the big fish in LA. It didn't quite work out that way. So they hired a big LA team, which I was a part of. And then they proceeded to ignore all of our advice and fight with studios and lose coverage and distribution and everything. And so I sat there in that job because it was a higher paying job and also a better position. I was the head of a writing team. I had 2 writers and a video editor under me. And quite honestly, it was 2.5 years of banging our heads against the wall. I did work from home some. I did a lot of the same stuff I did before, although I was more on the corporate side of things. I was in a lot of meetings. We had an executive team that would fly in from Minneapolis that many of them, it was sort of a mystery as to what they actually did on a daily basis, but we knew they liked to call meetings. So when they were in town, I would sit in meetings all day long and then stay at the office till 11 at night doing the work I normally did because I was in meetings all day long. But yeah, so I did that until there was a wave of layoffs in 2009, and I was survived the first two waves and was axed with the third layoff. But yeah, it was kind of a long time coming, and it was a sense of relief to get out of there. And at the time, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do next, but I knew I didn't want to do that. And I knew sitting at a desk in the corporate job scene was not my bag at all. And I was really, my wife, Melissa, still talks about kind of the level of depression and defeat that I had when I came in the door, especially in those last 6 to 12 months at that job. So
you studied journalism in school?
Kind of. I was a writing minor. My major was film and photo with a concentration in screenwriting, actually. But I did a lot of journalism work, and I wrote for my high school and college papers. So, I really wasn't thinking journalism, and I really wasn't thinking of being an entertainment journalist, but it was kind of a natural fit because I'd always done that. I've been doing it for years. And, it was actually really funny. A friend of mine, I was looking for production jobs, and a friend of mine just sent me a link, and he had been doing some freelance for IGN and said, "Hey, they're looking for more writers." And they needed something right away, a sample. They said, "Oh, we've already picked our guys. You're late to this, so get us something in an hour." So I wrote a quick review of the movie Adaptation, and it was kind of sloppy. I just tried to get it in, and the head guy called me. His name is Stephen Horn, and he was like, "It's a really good piece. You spelled Charlie Kaufman's name wrong." And I was like, "Oh, God." And I think I had spelled it two different ways, one right, one wrong. And yeah, so that always stuck in my mind and made me a better proofer. But he still hired me, so it
that's what editors are for, right?
Exactly. Where's the editors? Well, I mean, as many people might know, if anybody ever worked in the online world, especially in the early days, there are no editors. You're your own editor, and nobody cares about. People care a lot less these days about typos than they did 20 years ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good thing. But
no, I agree.
So after Reels, is that when you started the dog walking business?
Yeah, more or less. I floundered around for a little bit, trying to sort of figure out what was next. I freelanced for a bunch of different outlets. New York Post, Sci-Fi Channel, Fandango, and a horror site called Bloody Disgusting. So, I'm not a huge horror guy, but there was a lot of work. Bloody Disgusting led to FearNet and some other. I ended up getting a lot of horror work. So I watched torture porn movies like Saw and Hostel and went to those sets. And I actually wrote for a site that was trying to get me to cover gossip material, which I refused. And ultimately decided by the end of it, I was burnt out. The days of really being excited to interview celebrities and go to these events had waned quite a bit for me. People, in the early days of what we did next, people would say, you were going to movies and being flown to New York to fancy hotels and getting per diems. How could you leave that? But, it's a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, a lot of nights, and very repetitive. And you're kind of a corporate shill in the entertainment journalism world. It's, probably truth in real news as well. But, sometimes when I got a really juicy story and I went home to write it, or I witnessed something I maybe shouldn't have on a set, I would get contacted by the publicist that night, and they would say, "Don't write about this if you want to get into our next event." So I got kind of tired of that because it really didn't seem like I could write what I wanted to write anyway. So yeah.
So you're freelancing, right?
I was freelancing for probably almost a year. And in fact, I was continuing to freelance for a while when my wife and I started the business I'm about to speak about. But my wife, Melissa, had a background in dog training. She had trained all the way back to the 4-H club as a kid. And she was actually a nanny for a family, and she was looking to get out of that. So she had kind of gotten a small client-based dog training. She was working as an apprentice dog trainer, and a few of those clients had people that she had been helping out with. This other trainer had hired her on the side, and then some of them asked her about dog walking. So she was doing some dog walking, she was doing some training, And she was actually volunteering for a program called Canine Connection that placed at-risk shelter dogs with, placed at-risk youth with shelter dogs and helped train them. And so she was training for that, and I got pulled in as a photographer. So I came and assisted and helped out, did photography with that. And in those moments, without realizing it at the time, we were getting sort of pulled into this dog business world and meeting a lot of wealthy people who were interested in dog training or had dogs and needed services. So at the time, my wife got city contracts for the cities of Santa Monica and Malibu to train for their city classes through
I remember that. Yeah.
the mailers that the city sends out. So once again, I was the photographer for that. So I came and just helped, promote and pass out flyers and brochures and business cards and take photos. And I actually started a pet photography business called Shaggy Shutterbug at the time and did that a little bit on top of the freelance journalism. And, my wife started getting more and more requests for dog walking, more and more requests for training. And so, I said, maybe we could turn this into something. Maybe we could make a business out of this, or at least, turn a side business. And that's kind of what happened. It blew up really fast. We named the original business Positively Perfect Pooches, and I think that launched in 2011. I think we just passed the 12-year mark. And, we started at the beginning, my wife and I did everything. We did all the dog walks. She did all the training. She did a lot of the dog walks too. And then it was actually, there was reluctance from my wife that we needed to hire people and start having them do dog walking. And I was kind of, she still has that reluctance with the training. And, I was like thinking there's no way I want to walk dogs forever. So, and obviously that was kind of the limitation on the dog walking businesses that we were competing with. They could only take on, it was all single person operations at that time, and they could only take on however many clients they could handle in a day. But of course, if you could get a team on, it was sort of infinitely expandable. So that's what I started doing. I think I just initially placed an ad on Craigslist. I don't know how many people even know Craigslist anymore. I guess it's still around. But I placed an ad on Craigslist and I started hiring people, and we hired 2 or 3 walkers initially. And my dog is coming on the microphone here.
Hey, Blaine. Hey, I have a question about that, actually. Like, at that time, did you make a conscious decision to not re-enter the corporate world, right? Because even though you're doing some freelance work, the reality is it's not reliable work for most. I mean, for some it is. And you could go back into corporate to work for a publication, have a full-time job, full-time salary, benefits, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or were you not really thinking that? You were kind of you just shifted your focus entirely to starting this dog walking business and dog training business?
No, I was still thinking that at the time. In fact, I had interviews. I came real close on a job with MTV, and there were a few other jobs that I interviewed for, one at Fandango. None of it panned out, or it wasn't quite what I was looking for. So I did kind of teeter in both worlds for a while. And for a little while, I was thinking maybe pet photography, which I got a lot of jobs and a lot of work. I had a living social deal that sent me all over LA for about a year off and on. But so I wasn't really sure. I was really, when I say floundering, I really was. I had no idea what was next. And, I knew my wife and I, we weren't married yet. We wanted to get married. We wanted to have kids. And I was like, we were delaying. We'd been engaged forever, as you may know.
It's so interesting, Jeff. Who married you anyway?
Yeah. Yes.
You're talking to the minister.
You're talking to the minister here. An extra skill Jeff Apfel possesses, and underutilized in my opinion. I can't believe you haven't gotten hired again.
I know. I should pick up some more side work doing that. It's not a bad idea. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, but we digress.
But yeah, what I found my forte was kind of the marketing aspect of the dog walking business. My wife and I did all the consults together initially, but as she'll tell you, I did a lot of the talking and kind of upselling people. And I liked that. That was exciting and fun to me. And it was great, after years of seeing how much of my paycheck was taken away, to take home that money, for ourselves that was going directly to our own bank accounts. And it was actually there was definitely a moment of epiphany, and it was July of 2012, driving back from San Diego for my umpteenth time covering Comic-Con, which, if anybody doesn't know what Comic-Con is, it's like the ultimate nerd fest. Nerds are cool these days, so that's not an insult anymore, but they're richer than all of us. But so there's tons and tons of sweaty people in the San Diego Convention Center and a horrible body odor by the fourth day. And, I would escape this thing, and, I would work 7 a.m. till 2 a.m. and then come back to my hotel and meet deadlines and sleep an hour or two and head back. And, I was just so burnt out and so over it. And, there'd be some cool moments, but I remember sitting in traffic on the 405 calling Melissa, and I was like, that was it. She's like, what do you mean that was it? That was my last job. We're going to turn this business into something, because we were starting to get a lot of clients. I was bouncing between events and dog walks and consults for business. And I just said, we got to try this. We got to give it a real try. There's so many dog walking businesses around, but they're all kind of half-baked. They're all a teenager or single person operation. And, literally when we got our first jobs, when we set up the business, we set it up like I thought you would set up a business. I read books, looked at articles, and, we got our business license, we got our insurance, we figured out how to take credit cards and everything, set up the bank accounts. And, the first questions I got from all the clients was, do I just leave cash on the table? And how often do you cancel? And I was like, we'll take a credit card, we'll take a check, and we never cancel. And they'd always laugh like I was full of it, well, my old dog walker cancel all the time, or what happens if you go out of town? And I'm like, we're going to have somebody to cover your services. So we got a lot of loyalty with that. And even now, 12 years in, we've still got probably three or four clients who are from the very first days, and most of them are on their second dogs. We kind of approached it as, a real plan. We called it boutique dog walking business, or that's what it evolved to, because we wanted to try to turn it into something. And I think I spent an hour and a half on the phone with Melissa on that drive, just rambling about how this could be a huge thing for us. And I think she was excited about it, but also, she's heard me ramble about stuff like that many times. It was kind of like, yeah, whatever, we'll see. And I think she figured I'd probably go back to work as, another journalism job.
And so fast forward to today, you guys have a successful dog walking business. I don't know if Melissa's still doing much in the way of training, if you guys even have time for that. You do have 3 little kids after all. Obviously you're in a slightly different location, but still in Southern California. And you're maintaining the business. Are you doing any freelance writing work? I know you have your Substack, but are you doing any freelance?
I haven't done any entertainment journalism in over 10 years. I really,
it's been a long time.
It was actually true. I never did another. I got offered some jobs, but I did turn them down after that moment after San Diego. I really I was just burnt out at that point. And time to time for a little while, I did think about doing some work on the side, especially when things weren't as fast moving as I'd hoped. But, things kept coming and we kept surviving. And I was just kind of going, it was crazy to think, especially as I was competing with younger and younger kids coming out of film school. But, it went through my head. I can go walk 2 dogs and be done and make what I make, walk 2 or 3 dogs and make what I make in a day and a half of work as a journalist, which is kind of crazy, but it was true at that time. I would be competing with kids who would, take the job just to meet a celebrity. So I was kind of going, this isn't really getting me anywhere. And at that point, my rate had gotten so high because I had so much experience that, it was very hard to find the jobs that really wanted to pay what I was.
Interesting. You're kind of pricing yourself out. Yeah. But that makes sense. And actually, I want to talk more maybe in another episode about that transition from being an employee to being a business owner, and what the benefits are, what the detriments are, because it's people think, oh, I'm going to start a business. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I'm my own boss and I have all these benefits. Yeah, that's true, but it's really freaking hard, and there's a lot of stress, and it's not like you you're going to have stress in life anyway, regardless of whether you're working in a corporate environment or your own business. It's just maybe a different type of stress and different, triggers for that stress. But, it's interesting because so you've had now, I don't know how many years of experience working as an employee and as a business owner. That's actually a very interesting mix. But even when you were working as an employee, I think especially earlier on in, let's say, the early 2000s, remote work wasn't really a thing. I mean, maybe for some industries, but as a general rule, it's butts in seats, right? In an office, under, fluorescent light bulbs, and, you're lucky if
it was more common in the entertainment world, but it was definitely unusual. When I told people that I was working from home, it got some raised eyebrows, especially that I was working from home and then going to see 2 movies.
Yeah, totally. So now there's this. So obviously we had COVID, and during COVID, there were, mandates essentially to work from home. And then over time, companies started calling their employees back into the office, and some required their employees to come back maybe 2 days out of the week, 3 days out of the week, 4 or even 5. I think it's probably more unusual to be 5 days a week, depending on industry. But right now, it's not uncommon for employers to offer a hybrid type of work situation where, you can work from home, let's say 2 days a week. You can choose which days those are, or maybe not. Again, depends on the company. And now there are a lot of studies coming out with really conflicting results, or like survey results or results from the study.
I was looking at some of those articles you sent me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They're conflicting, right? Some, one of these articles says that less, and it's a recent article from actually my birthday, June 18th, 2023. So not that many months ago. And it's titled "Less Productive, More Depressed: The Problem with Working from Home," right? And then there's this other article.
I saw that title. It took me by surprise. I was thinking, how many people are depressed about working from home? I haven't met those people.
Yeah, well, apparently they exist, right? And so
it depends on your home life, maybe.
True. Another article, which is more recent, from just a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's very recent. It says, it's titled "The Old Office is Going Extinct. Here's what the New Normal of Work Looks Like." And the entire article is talking about the advantages to both employers and employees to hybrid work. Mm-hmm. And so there's so many factors involved. And after reading these, my conclusion was, well, it depends on the person, as you alluded to. It depends on, their home life. It depends on, their satisfaction with a hybrid work model or a full remote model, which of course exists. Again, more so in some industries than others. And then another work model where you got to have your butt in the seat 5 days a week in the office, right? That exists probably more in like financial services, that sort of thing. But the employee satisfaction with their work life and the employer's satisfaction with the productivity of their employees, it's not a one size fits all thing. It's not a black and white kind of analysis or outcome. So anyway, I was curious what your thoughts were on that, given your experience working in like earlier than, today, 20 years ago, let's say, in kind of a hybrid model when it wasn't really a thing, generally speaking.
Yeah. I think it depends. I think there's so many factors that you can't give it a one size fits all approach. In the creative fields, the problem I had with working in an office was that we had marketing people and, finance people that would interrupt us when we were working on creative articles. And so that would drive me crazy, because if I was at home, I'd usually put music on or put headphones on, and I'd knock out my articles, a couple reviews, an interview piece. But, if I'm like really in the zone of my writing and then someone taps me on the shoulder and said, I got a question about this expense report, then I'm like, it's not like I just turn it back on and go right back into it. So I spent a lot of late nights at ReelzChannel just banging my head against the wall. And we had a lot of discussions with the corporate team there about how effective working from home was. I remember at the time we had sent them some articles on bestbuy.com doing a work from home study and showing this massive increase in productivity. And there was no doubt with my team at that point. I mean, what I saw in productivity on the days where people were from home versus when they were in the office was probably twice as much work. So, but my only experience I can give is in the creative space. And I think it really depends, what sort of office atmosphere you create. If you create an office atmosphere where, I never was good at working in an atmosphere where every dog is pulling the wire. I was never good at working in an office atmosphere where I couldn't get away from everything. Like I couldn't shut a door, or, the cubicle setup didn't work very well for me because it was just, there was too many distractions. There were conversations going by that would catch my ear. So, I started with earbuds, and then I got a giant pair of big, obnoxious white headphones that were really, to be like, hey, look, I've got these huge headphones on. Leave me
alone.
Go away. I'm working. I think it really depends on the office atmosphere. It's interesting. I recently read the book and watched the WeWork drama series on Apple TV. And that made me laugh about a lot of the sort of, it was reminding me somewhat of my IGN days, but, this office atmosphere that would be just distracting and chaotic. And, at IGN, there'd be days where I really had a lot to do and guys are cracking beers open at, 2 p.m. And I'm like, you want to be a part of that culture. You don't want to be the guy who you say, all right, let me have a beer. And then a couple beers later and, we're watching a screening or something and I've still got articles to do. And I'm like, oh God. So, my experience was always that I got more done at home. But, these days with 3 kids, I can say that isn't always the case. And there's certainly been days where home life disruptions have erupted and, just chaos and, things happen. Like we were talking before this interview about technology malfunctions and stuff. There's just so many factors. I've got 2 desks at home, one in the bedroom here and one in the garage. And I have do not disturb signs that slide open and close that the kids know about and somewhat respect. But,
yeah, that's interesting.
There's no perfect scenario. I can certainly see both sides of the argument. And I guess, the proof is in the pudding. I think it really also depends on the individual. Some people are going to work from home and really take advantage of that. And some people are going to work from home and, see that as a privilege and really produce.
Yeah. Yeah. This one other article, the one that is titled Less Productive, More Depressed, the problem with working from home. It says that researchers also found that many outcomes improved the longer the study went on. So later on in the study, and a large proportion of the negative effects observed could be attributed to poor management. Like, of course. Yeah. Your manager has so much of an impact on your productivity, on, your satisfaction with work. And that doesn't change if you're working remote, Right. If anything, it might even be more important if you're working remote. So I just found this interesting how complete opposite the survey results of this one were from the other one. This concludes that work from home has made us less productive on average. That's the complete opposite.
I think another thing is also your work from home approach. One thing I've learned, if I really kind of, don't take a shower and, just wear what I slept in and, maybe I don't go and take the dog on a walk. They're just like, oh, I got to get to work. And I just jump to my desk and start working. It definitely doesn't work. I really don't work that much in the mornings. I really kind of have a routine, walk the dog. I do some writing. I do some reading, and if I don't really start my day that well, then I am less productive and less focused working from home. And I've fallen into that trap. I still do once in a while, and I kind of have to catch myself. If I don't, get showered and get ready and get dressed like I'm going to a real office, I definitely, just less in the zone. One of my favorite classes in college was this professional writing class I took. This very animated professor named Antonio Dorenzo. And he told this story about his mom taking him into a bank dressed slovenly, and then seeing how the approach was and how they were treated with some questions about, I think, a loan or whatever. And then going back to that same bank later in the day, dressed to the nines. And they didn't even recognize them. He talked a lot about, talking about dressing for success and all that stuff is a whole different topic, but it was interesting. He talked a lot about the mindset. When you put on certain outfits, when you take a shower, when you shave, when you do certain things, I think that may be the work from home trapping that some people fall into.
One thing because I worked from home when I was at Accenture for, I don't know, a few days a week. It actually ended up becoming more like, and this is all pre-COVID, people just could stop coming into the office.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I started experiencing was, some like loneliness and lack of, you want to interact with people. Like we're
Right.
humans, we're social animals, so there is much less interaction, obviously, if you're working remotely, even with video conferencing, than there is when you're working in an office environment. I personally love the hybrid model, but it depends how it's implemented, whether that's going to be successful. And also a lot of that has to do with, as we talked about, with the employees and their satisfaction with how it's set up. So there's actually a lot more to dive into.
Do you like the people you work with?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No,
that makes going into the office a whole different thought process.
Totally. Yeah. So there's a lot more to dive into, and I want to do that. There's so many of these subtopics to get into. Like each one we could talk about for its own, for example, like corporate culture and people's attitudes at work. That of course has a huge impact on whether or not you want to, be in the office for not just being in the office for whatever it is, 8, 9, 10 hours, but your commute. Most people have to commute, whether it's on the subway or in a car. Think of how much more frustration and stress you have when you are sitting in the car for 45 minutes or an hour, maybe even more, knowing that you're going to walk into an office that you hate being at. Right. I mean, it just adds so much, further frustration and dissatisfaction. And of course, that bleeds into, people's personal lives. Right. When you come home all pissy because you had such a shitty day at work, you have to deal with shit attitudes. Your spouse or your significant other, or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, is going to be like, what's wrong with you? And then it causes, issues in your personal life.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you've had a bad day and you got to deal with, an hour and a half of LA road rage.
It's the worst.
And you're right over the top.
Yeah, it's the worst. So I'd love to dive into these topics more. Thanks for listening to this episode of Office IQ. If you're looking for ways to accelerate your path to success, you can find more resources like this on our YouTube channel or at officeintelligence.com. We offer courses and other content that will literally change the direction of your career for the better. If there are any topics you'd like to hear more about or questions you'd like me to address on future episodes, you can send an email to jeff@officeintelligence.com.